What's up, YouTube family? Here making another video today to commemorate and celebrate and review the band Death and Chuck Schuldiner, or I should say Schuldiner, and the documentary that was released in 2018, Death by Metal, which I believe is the name of their first demo tape, which came out in '84. I wanted to make this video because I watched the documentary yesterday and I've been thinking about it a lot and trying to collect my thoughts about it. And there's a few things I want to say. First of all, we all know Death was one of the first death metal bands, but there's some controversy, or I guess a little argument on the internet between death metal fans about whether or not Death was the first death metal band. And people always point to, of course, well, we know that Scream Bloody Gore came out in '87. We know that Possessed Seven Churches came out in '85, I believe. And people always point to Possessed Seven Churches as being the first death metal release, and Possessed as being the first death metal band. But a couple of things about that. First of all, when I watched this documentary, they actually revealed to me that Death's been around since at least '84. And their first demo, Death by Metal, came out in '84. So even though they weren't signed to a major record label at the time, and even though it wasn't a wide release in record stores, Death by Metal was before Possessed Seven Churches. I haven't listened to Death by Metal, even though I know the demo tape is up on YouTube. So I don't know what it sounds like, but they played some audio clips from some of Death's early demos. And to me, it sounds like '90s death metal. So Death had been working on this sound for a long time. And I think I know they were initially called Mantis, but given the fact that Death by Metal, the demo came out in '84, I think you would be safe in saying that Death was in fact the first death metal band, even though their album Scream Bloody Gore didn't come out till '87. Also, another point I wanted to make about sorry, I'm coughing a lot. Another point I wanted to make about Possessed Seven Churches is that if you actually go back and listen to that record, it sounds terrible. The production is crap. The performances are lackluster. It doesn't sound half as good as Scream Bloody Gore does. And I don't even really like Scream Bloody Gore that much. But if you're just talking about it from an objective standpoint, Scream Bloody Gore sounds much tighter, much more fully developed. And Possessed Seven Churches is extremely rough and sloppy, in my opinion. So, yeah, I think still, I want to try to put this argument to rest a little bit and just say that, in my opinion, I think Death is the first death metal band. I know Necrophagia from Ohio. There are some people that say they're the first. But, yeah, to me, Death by Metal, Death, they are the ultimate death metal band. And I think Chuck really pioneered that style of playing. And without him and without the band Death, I don't think death metal would exist in its current form. And I think that's a very safe argument. So, putting that to rest. Um, Number two, what I wanted to talk about was that, Chuck has always been one of my heroes. I've been a fan of Death's music since I was in high school, since I first discovered them through the Sound of Perseverance album way back then. And I've always kind of idolized Chuck, especially since I was a guitar player. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to play like him. I wanted to sound like him. But watching this documentary really brought to light, at least for me, some of his personal flaws. Specifically, how hard he was to work with and how sensitive he was about his music and how stuck in his ego he really was as an individual. It just seemed like he demanded way too much from his bandmates, and the direction of Death was constantly changing. The where he wanted to go with the music, it was the sound kept evolving from album to album, and his vision for the band, it kept changing over time, and one way or another he would just fire the musicians that he was working with and start fresh all over with new musicians. So Death was a constantly rotating lineup of people, and yeah, it's just it's kind of, it makes me feel like Chuck was kind of a dick, and I don't know how else to put that, but yeah, I just wasn't very impressed with a lot of the stories that I heard from musicians that had worked with him and canceling tours overseas, and he it seemed like he had a very close attachment to his home in Florida. And anytime he would go somewhere else, be it California or Canada or Europe or wherever it was, after a few days or a few weeks, he would get fed up with it and he would say he wanted to come home. So, yeah, it was just, it's unfortunate because, I wish he could have picked like a stellar lineup and then held on to that for years and years and years. That would have been, I think, a lot better for the continuity and consistency of the band. And I think it's better for fans too, because they really get to latch on to the individuals that are in the band. When there's constantly a new lineup every album, then it kind of like makes it harder to be a true fan of the band, I believe. So, but they did talk about every album, except in the documentary, they didn't really go into the Sound of Perseverance album that much, which I guess was, I couldn't even believe this when they said it, but Sound of Perseverance was never supposed to happen, essentially. Chuck had decided he didn't want to do death metal anymore. He didn't want to be in a death metal band. And he wanted to be more of a Queensryche, 80s progressive or 80s power metal band with a clean singer. And he didn't want to do vocals anymore. And so at least half of those Sound of Perseverance tracks were actually Control Denied songs. And the only reason they were released under the name Death and they were performed the way they were was because when Control Denied got signed by Nuclear Blast wrote into the contract that Chuck had to release one more Death album before he could do the Control Denied album. And so then we got the Sound of Perseverance. So several of those songs, I can't remember which ones. I know Moment of Clarity was one. I want to say Bite the Pain was another one. There were some songs on there that were initially Chuck had envisioned a clean singer doing those songs, and they were never supposed to be death songs. So it sounds like Sound of Perseverance was kind of, uh, you know, put together and put out there, at least into the public domain, against the wishes of Chuck, which is kind of sad because I think that's one of Death's best albums. And yeah, also, I'm not a fan of Control Denied either. I've listened to Control Denied and I don't like it. I think Chuck was a really good vocalist, and I don't think he ever really enjoyed that aspect of his music, of his own music. And to me, that's sad because he's got one of the most iconic, unique deliveries in all of the history of death metal. So the documentary was cool, but I kind of learned some things about the band and about Chuck that kind of tainted the legacy just a little bit. Especially when somebody dies the way Chuck did, at such a young age and with so much, being such a big loss for the metal community, you always want to remember them fondly, but this really got into some of the dark aspects of who Chuck was and his impact on the people around him and how he acted like kind of a douchebag at several different points. And to me, I don't understand why he didn't like the term death metal or didn't want to be associated with all these other death metal bands, especially since Death's music is clearly one of the pioneers of that style of music. To me, it's like just own it, own it and love it and go forward with it because it's yours. It's like your baby. But I guess he saw when they were over in Europe, Chuck and a bunch of the other band members saw a magazine, European magazine, with an ad for death metal on the back. And Death Symbolic, the album cover, was on there next to all these other death metal albums. And Chuck got pissed and called his manager or called the record label and bitched him out. It's just like stories like that, man. I feel like he's really doing a disservice to death metal, and it's disappointing as a fan to know that he was like that he thought that way. And Control Denied, in my opinion, is utter garbage. So, yeah, so as a Death fan, I guess they're still one of my favorite bands of all time. But I'm no longer like a Chuck fanboy anymore. I can't be. Not after watching that. And side note, I also talked to the lead singer of Atheist. I saw Atheist, would have been several months ago in Lawrence, Kansas with Suffocation. And I asked him about Chuck Schuldiner, and the lead singer from Atheist basically like threw Chuck under the bus and said Chuck Schuldiner was a bitch. He said, "What do you think he was like if Gene Hoglan, the nicest guy in the world, could only stand to work with him for 2 albums?" All this stuff about how Chuck was like basically a giant douchebag. And I didn't want to believe it when I talked to that guy, and I still, part of me doesn't want to believe that. But yeah, this documentary really hammered home a lot of that kind of business, a lot of that funny business for me. And it's just, it's sad. It's sad because you kind of idolize your heroes in a way, and you want to see them perfect. You don't want to see them with their flaws and their warts, but Chuck definitely had some flaws. Even though I still think his guitar playing is probably my favorite out of anybody ever. Anyway, I think it's a good documentary. It's called Death by Metal. It came out in 2018. I would recommend it to everybody. But yeah, it's brutally, the documentary is brutally honest. I don't think you guys should go into it with the expectation that it's just going to be a love fest for Chuck Schuldiner, because it's not. There's a lot of negative stuff in there too. Anyway, I just wanted to do this quick review and give some thoughts on that documentary and on death in general. And yeah, if you guys have seen the documentary too, just leave a comment below. Let me know what songs or metal songs or metal albums you'd like to see me react to or review on this channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I hope you have a good day or a good night wherever you are in the world. Thank you.